on Waverly, I don't think. I don't know that we have to do heavy haul on Waverly. But that's just a thought. But Cheryl, is what the rest of the council members are proposing as far as putting together some kind of standard for traffic on Cherokee Street up to, well, at least up to Poplar for the time being, and then down to Waverly if we annex. That's something that we can accomplish easily?
Well, Waverly Road really is essential for the development of this project. What they asked for was temporary access to 183rd, but as we discussed the timeline with them, temporary is a long time.
Right.
Because in the road building world, you have that time frame of just doing the whole design, engineering of it, and then the construction cost and the construction time frame. If we're going to apply for the CARS grant, we wouldn't be in that cycle until next year, April. So next year before we would even be able to apply for that, and then we get into design and then construction. So we're talking a few years. It's not like temporary would be short term.
Right.
Then CARS would provide 50%. We would need an agreement to do the other 50% with Edgerton, or the city would need to be considering completing it with 50% and trying to work an agreement where they would pay us at some later point. Edgerton's agreement to do Waverly is once they get 1.5 million square feet of construction.
Do they have to do that, or is that when they get money for doing that? Because as I recall, they get money at 1.5 million square feet, but I don't know that that's...
My understanding of the agreement from them is that 1.5 million triggers them actually doing the project. So the incentive for them to do it early really isn't there, because they can develop inside their city limits up until they get the resources to do it. They would probably not be inclined to start on Waverly Road early. But Waverly is essential, or the city would need to be willing to make a commitment to do 183rd, not in the short term, but for a long term.
And 183rd would also need to be brought up to some sort of standards, I'm assuming, for heavy haul. I mean,
if it was going to be used.
huh?
Well, if you have Waverly, you could probably go Waverly down to 191st.
But I'm saying until we get Waverly.
Oh, until you get Waverly, yes.
If we were to say temporary access
That
to
is correct.
183rd, then we're still spending money for heavy haul.
Right.
In a residential area.
In
a residential area. So that's kind of why Waverly is really critical for the success of this project.
So whether we say it directly or we say it's not pragmatic, the outcome is still the same, Heath, I think, which is that road is off the table when Waverly is an agreeable solution between the two cities. Then we'd be happy to talk about it then. Would you agree? I mean, if
right now it's not. That was my point, is right now it's not. So we would have to pass ordinances and change the way that we were going to do that. And like I said, I think those are two different conversations, because I don't think it needs to be specific to this development. That just needs to be what Gardner's approach is to access to this side of the intermodal, is that's never going to be part of 183rd. And that, we just block that out now. So that's not part of considerations down the road. For me, it's two unique situations. And that way the developer doesn't say, they held us hostage with this road. Gardner, as a city's direction, was to say, we're not comfortable with ever having heavy load access to a residential street.
Exactly.
We're going to block that off now. And that's just taken from
Yep,
here.
And I'm in agreement with that. I think it's a great...
We can't fund that road. We can't change that road. If we're going to have to put that money forward, we're best to route that through Waverly Road off 191st Street.
okay, well then how do we make that into an ordinance?
Can we have a council action
I
form?
mean, it sounds like everybody is
Uh,
agreeable to that.
And I guess, is there a bigger, I
Well,
mean,
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
we should probably
it may not
have-
be that simple. I think I think that's what your hesitation is. It's
Yeah, I was
as
thinking we
simple as
probably should
saying
have a
we
larger
want to draft the ordinance
Oh,
and
that's
says no
fine.
longer.
Yeah.
There's several things to be considered, but I think that's probably what we might need to address, much rather sooner than later.
Well, I wonder if I could just point something out. It's hard to talk about the Zimmer site without talking about the other parcels around it.
Absolutely.
That could either go into Edgerton or Gardner.
Mhm.
And if you look at the site, there's a map attached to your council action form. If you look at the Zimmer site, you can see that there's an 80-acre site, the same shape between the Zimmer site, the big industrial site, and the city limits. And so, as we have conversations with these property owners about their desirability or their desire to go into Gardner or Edgerton, all of those things affect that desirability.
Right.
And so that's something to think about. Keep in mind that the big industrial site, they can go into Edgerton tomorrow pretty easily, because it's contiguous with Edgerton. It's not contiguous with Gardner.
Well,
The-
they could be annexed, but they can't drive trucks through there. I mean, right?
I don't know the
There'd be no
answer to that
benefit.
question, but I think I don't personally know the answer to that
Well, I
question.
mean, they can't drive trucks on a gravel road like that.
Oh, through that,
No, they couldn't, they
Yeah.
wouldn't use Waverly
Yeah, so I mean-
Road.
yeah, I thought you were talking about 183rd.
No, they wouldn't develop that
Yeah.
without Waverly Road being
Yeah.
developed.
So, I mean, I guess, so they could be annexed, what does it matter if they can't drive?
Right.
If they can't develop it to handle trucks?
They would not be able to develop the site in the near term under the conditions that Edgerton is now under, based on what we know. But what that would mean is that it would be easier it would make it simpler for these other parcels that are currently contiguous with the city of Gardner to go to Edgerton. And I hate to be so explicit about it, but I think that is really what we're talking about, is this 300 acres or so that's in play. You know, there were 320 acres, and now there's 30 acres less in play
Mhm.
because of the 4 parcels at the northeast corner of 191st and Waverly that have now been annexed to Edgerton.
I guess from my perspective, and the conversation regarding Edgerton and whether this property gets annexed to Edgerton is valid from the perspective of, I think we are all pretty confident on what's going to go there, right? Whether it's annexed to Gardner or Edgerton. So from that perspective, it's kind of a control thing. It's probably going to be big industrial. But for me, I hate to say I don't care what Edgerton does from a financial perspective. I mean, that's up to them. To me, this is about the financials for us. And so I'm looking at this, and if we say, you know, $7.7 million over 10 years is what we're going to get, and then, of course, there's a longer term, you know, past 10 years. But let's just look at the short term, the 10 years, $7.7 million. If we were to pay for the heavy haul road, I mean, that just reduces that substantially. But then the other part of that is the ongoing maintenance of that road, which is a cost. That's not, so, I mean, virtually, we could be getting hardly anything on this. And I know that the other conversation is we're not getting anything today. So, I mean, that's another way to look at it. But I think for me, whatever Edgerton is or isn't going to do is not, we need to look at the benefit for us and the cost associated with that. And I think this I think outlines a great picture as far as from the revenue side, but I still don't feel confident that we understand if we were to enter into this agreement, what are those longer term costs associated with maintaining something like this? I mean, even if we had the $4.5 million or whatever it would turn out to be to pave that road, I mean, there's ongoing expenses associated with it that we're going to have to pay. So, I mean, I just think that to me, that's the way we should be looking at it.
And not just that, Chrissy, and you outlined my concerns as well, but not just that, but that's assuming that this project is going to actually have a $40 million tax valuation. And I don't know if that's necessarily been established. As Larry said in previous meetings, the Coleman facility in particular was assessed at a valuation which is far above what it currently is.
Yeah, the industrial revenue bonds you know, the build cost was $54 million, and the appraised value, which is based on, rental rate,